I've got a fever, and the only cure is more Nintendo games. So what exactly can we expect in 2026? We already have a pretty stellar first quarter, with games like Dragon Quest VII, like Yakuza 3, like Monster Hunter Stories 3, like Resident Evil 9, like Tales of Berseria. There's a ton of games for like the first 4 months of the year or so that we already know about, that we're looking forward to, that there's plenty to play, especially. It's very, very interesting kind of looking at the narrative versus reality in this kind of thing, because everyone's screaming about how there's nothing to play on Switch 2, and yet I personally, Harmon Smith, am like bogged down by endless amounts of games. It is ridiculous, honestly. Just seeing how many games I still have to get through, how I'm struggling through Double Dragon, how I need to get through like Tales of Xillia, how I want to go back to Tears of the Kingdom, how I want to play like Metroid Prime 4 again. Like, there's a lot going on the Nintendo Switch 2 ecosystem, right? There's a lot of games to play, a lot of things to experience. I'm going through Fire Emblem Path of Radiance. I'm playing Wario World. I'm playing, I am anxiously awaiting the release of Mario Tennis Fever, right? But what are we going to see with the next Nintendo Direct? What exactly can we anticipate? Obviously we have, the big heavy hitters, right? We have Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave. We have general, the things we already know about, right? There's a lot of games we already know about for this year, but the big titles of this year are still kind of, haven't been confirmed yet, right? We don't know necessarily what we're going to see the first full year of the Nintendo Switch 2. So I do feel like, honestly, that we are going to see a lot of surprises going forward. We could see an F-Zero game. We could see, a new we could see ARMS 2. We could see The Legend of Zelda. We could see, a new 3D Mario. The sky's the limit when it comes to Switch 2 right now. And it's kind of amazing to see how many people are just, spurging out, doing everything they possibly can to try and downplay and ignore Nintendo. That's kind of what we've been seeing here over the past several days, is just this really interesting narrative where everyone's coming out saying the Switch 2 has no games, there's nothing to play on this thing, Nintendo was disappointing this year, and in actuality, a single Nintendo Direct is going to upend all of that, and the entire cope and seed cycle that we've been going through for a year will be done and dusted. Nobody will talk about it. Nobody will, everyone will just kind of move on to the next thing, it's going to be very, very hard to downplay something like Metroid Prime 4 when, there's dozens of other games coming out. It's going to be really, really interesting to see, just how the community rallies to try and downplay the next wave of video games on Nintendo Switch 2. So, with all that being said, what do I personally expect to see at the next Nintendo Direct? Of course, we are going to see, more Tamagotchi Life. We are going to see more Rhythm Heaven. We are going to see, we're possibly going to see, one last Mario Tennis trailer. Honestly, I could see, the Nintendo Direct airing that, the week that comes out, actually. We might see some more from, some other, major upcoming third-party games. There's a lot of interesting things that are coming out, including Amiibo for Resident Evil 9 and Pragmata, which I think pretty much guarantees that, the Switch versions of those games are going to be, the most successful. It is very, very, very interesting to see, to think how the sky's the limit, because theoretically, we could see anything there. We could see, Dragon Quest 12, we can see Dragon Quest Monster, the Dark Prince 2, we can see, all sorts of things that can, just kind of come out of nowhere, honestly. Metal Gear Solid, a Legacy Collection 2 could drop. There's a lot of things that can just kind of come out of nowhere, and And I do think that, like, this is what people really need to wrap their little minds around, is that these Nintendo Directs are a regular occurrence. They always detail the games that are coming out in the next 4 to 6 months, right? Occasionally, like, a year. You know, in theory, we could get some huge upending, like, generation-defining announcement next month, right? And everybody's acting as if, like, the Switch 2 time to shine has already passed. Like, sorry to say this, but no. You are completely delusional. You are out of touch with reality. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know what you're talking about. That is the... That is something that we all really have to accept and understand, is that you are completely out of touch with how video games work. Because people are buying the Switch 2s, people are setting up their Nintendo accounts, people are learning about, like, classic Nintendo software through apps like Nintendo Today. People are being exposed to, like, all these different Nintendo IPs. And so the classic cope, the idea that, like, Nintendo only thrives off of Mario, Zelda, and Pokemon, this console launch did not have a single mainline Mario or Zelda game. Mario Kart is a spinoff, Hyrule Warriors is a spinoff. Like, so the Nintendo Switch 2 is as successful as it is before the biggest games drop. We don't have, like, any word on Splatoon Raiders, we don't have any word on Splatoon 4, we don't have any word on, like, what Nintendo is doing with, like, the next Zelda, Mario, mainline Pokemon. Like, I think people are going to be completely blown away when we do finally see news of, like, Pokemon Gen 10, when we finally see news of the next 3D Zelda, or we see news of the next 3D Mario, Like, I think people are going to be, like, shocked by just how much Nintendo dominates the next couple of years. That's, it's going to be crazy, I fully expect that, like, Grand Theft Auto 6 is going to be buried under the vast releases of high-quality Nintendo Switch games. And people are going to be coping about this, like, well, Grand Theft Auto 6 has sold 250 million units. Like, nobody cares. Yeah, Pokemon outgrosses it, Mario outperforms it, It's only a matter of time until Splatoon and Animal Crossing outperform it, okay? Like, Grand Theft Auto is not a viable IP. That is, like, the big takeaway from 2026, is that I think this is going to be a really good example as to how unviable Grand Theft Auto actually is. Because it's not going to stop Nintendo. It's not going to destroy their IPs. It's not going to somehow, like, save Xbox and PlayStation. What you're going to see is just this slow, gradual decline of a brand that's been put on a pedestal for way too long. Okay, the idea that, like, Grand Theft Auto 6 is going to be the biggest media release ever is just downright laughable. It is ridiculous, and it really should be thought of as ridiculous. Like, this is kind of the last stand for PlayStation and Xbox and PC, and it's just not going to be able to compete with Pokemon. That's just the reality of it. That's my major takeaway at this point, is that, like, what you're going to see is the slow, gradual decline of Grand Theft Auto. The slow, gradual decline of James Cameron's Avatar. The slow, gradual decline of Disney. The slow, gradual decline of Lord of the Rings, of Narnia, of Netflix, of pretty much every other inferior entertainment brand that exists. All of them are going to be completely mogged by Nintendo, their games, their hardware, and especially their movies and merchandise. You are living in a Nintendo world.